48 BC, the Battle of Dyrrhachium. Marcus Cassius Scaevour stands in a breach in the fortifications, breathing heavily and leaning on his shield. His left eye has been destroyed by an enemy arrow, and hot blood flows continuously down his face. 120 arrows are already embedded in his wooden shield, making it as heavy as a stone slab. Retreat is out of the question under any circumstances. Behind him lies Julius Caesar's vulnerable camp and the fate of the entire civil war. At this moment, Scaevour feels none of the usual human fear, because the Roman war machine had long since burned that emotion out of him. He simply raises his free hand, signaling to his exhausted soldiers to straighten their ranks before a new attack. This is not a scene from a Hollywood movie, but a real historical episode, documented by Caesar himself in his military notes. A single wounded man held off an entire enemy cohort simply because the regulations forbade him from leaving his post. And the most interesting thing here is how exactly this ancient system produced such indomitable men. The Romans weren't born fearless warriors. They became so after passing through the most brutal meat grinder in history. But there is one crucial detail that completely overturns our conventional understanding of ancient Roman history. The Roman army triumphed not so much because of the genius of its generals, as because of the flawless performance of its mid-level commanders. We'll walk through all the ranks of the legion, drawing on historical facts, ancient regulations, and the biographies of real people. You'll understand why career advancement in Rome was the most dangerous social ladder in the entire ancient world. At the end, we'll be sure to return to Scaevour to find out how that frenzied battle at the fortifications of Dyrrhachium ended. Pour yourself your favorite drink, because we're about to begin our in-depth exploration of the Empire's hidden mechanisms. The long journey in the Roman army always began at the very bottom, with no guarantees of survival. A new recruit immediately received the status of tiro, which literally meant novice or recruit in Latin. At that moment, the young man lost some of his civil liberties and effectively became the property of the legion. The great general Gaius Marius, at the end of the 2nd century BCE, made this position accessible to anyone who wanted it. He began mass recruiting the poor, whom Roman society contemptuously called proletarians, into the army. For these young men, the status of tiro was their only chance to secure a steady supply of food, clothing, and prospects for the future. But the harsh reality of military camp life very quickly dampened these young men's enthusiasm. For the first 4 months of service, a tiro was not even considered a full-fledged combat soldier of the empire. The Roman military theorist Vegetius wrote that recruits were first trained at length to march in perfect formation, and only then were they given weapons. The main idea was to break down individualism and force a person to move in perfect sync with the others. Modern neuroscientists confirm that marching in sync within a group lowers cortisol levels and effectively suppresses personal fear. The Romans didn't know complex scientific terms, but they understood perfectly well how to transform a frightened crowd of peasants into a single, unified entity. Training in the tiro was similar to modern hybrid fitness, only with the constant threat of physical punishment for laziness. A recruit had to march 29 kilometers within a strict 5-hour time limit. At the same time, he carried about 30 kilograms of gear, including food, heavy camp stakes, and a pickaxe. My own shoulders start to ache just from the thought of this daily, grueling, forced march. The tiro's training swords were made of solid wood and weighed exactly twice as much as real combat blades. Roman instructors used the principle of muscle overload 2,000 years before the advent of modern sports institutions. The historian Josephus later wisely observed that the Romans' training was bloodless combat, and their battles were bloody training. A recruit had to learn to set up a fortified camp every evening, regardless of fatigue or weather conditions. This was a truly ingenious system for psychologically unburdening a soldier's mind before sleep. The hard labor of digging a trench and erecting a palisade by hand kept their hands busy, completely distracting their minds from thoughts of death the next day. Modern cognitive psychotherapy uses similar methods of routine, monotonous actions to combat panic attacks. The legionnaires simply picked up heavy shovels and literally buried their growing anxiety in the damp European soil. During these training exercises, the recruit also encountered brutal Roman discipline in practice for the first time. Any tardiness to roll call was punished with severe blows from a vine branch, skillfully wielded by the instructor. If an exhausted recruit accidentally fell asleep on night watch, a terrible punishment known as the fusterium awaited him. This meant that the offender's tentmates would beat him to death with wooden sticks and stones without trial. It sounds barbaric to modern ears, but this is precisely how the system fostered absolute mutual responsibility within the unit. Your life depended directly on the guy to your right, so you had a vested interest in his vigilance. During this brutal phase, recruits began to realize for the first time the practical role of religion in the legion's military affairs. Every recruit took a sacred military oath, officially called the sacramentum in Latin. This was not merely a legal contract, but a profound religious act binding the soldier's soul to the emperor or commander. From that moment on, any act of desertion was considered not merely a trivial crime, but a direct insult to the vengeful gods. Religion in the legion functioned as a powerful and infallible tool for managing the collective psychology of the soldiers. The status of a full-fledged soldier instantly granted access to a new, incredibly complex reality within the camp. Here, survival depended not only on physical strength, but also on the ability to navigate the hidden social hierarchy. A newly minted Roman soldier had to quickly figure out who in his unit held real power. An ordinary legionary found himself at the very bottom of a gigantic pyramid where any superior could destroy his career. And to avoid becoming nameless cannon fodder, he had to master the new rules of the game with phenomenal speed. So what exactly did daily life look like for someone who had successfully completed the grueling training? The main combat unit of the entire vast Roman army was the munifex, or the most basic line legionary. This Latin word itself refers to a person who laboriously performs routine duties without any special privileges. The entire economy, construction, and logistics of the grand ancient military campaigns rested on his worn-out shoulders. Emperor Octavian Augustus established a very clear term of service for such soldiers: 20 years on active duty and 5 years in the reserve. This meant that a young man voluntarily gave the best years of his life to the legion in exchange for the promise of a plot of land and a pension. Far from every wearer of the red tunic managed to live to see that coveted pension. The daily life of a typical legionary was strictly organized around the contubernia, the smallest unit consisting of 8 men. These diverse individuals lived for years in a single cramped leather tent, eating, marching, and fighting side by side. Such a close-knit structure created an incredibly strong and unbreakable emotional bond among the rank-and-file soldiers. In modern armies around the world, this phenomenon is called small group cohesion, and it is the primary factor in soldiers' psychological resilience. A legionary's personal weapon was a true masterpiece of ancient engineering, both pragmatic and deadly. The main weapon in fierce combat against superior enemies was the pilum, a heavy javelin with a long iron tip. The ingenious secret of the pilum lay in the fact that, upon striking an enemy shield with great force, the soft iron would immediately bend. The enemy was physically unable to pull the bent javelin out of the shield or throw it back at the advancing Romans. In a panic, they were forced to drop their now heavier shields, leaving themselves completely defenseless against the ranks of disciplined legionaries. This ingenious technical solution by Gaius Marius forever transformed the Roman infantry into an invincible offensive force. The close-quarters combat tactics of an ordinary legionary also differed radically from the glamorous cinematic clichés we are accustomed to. None of the Romans ran chaotically across the battlefield, shouting loudly, or sought out noble one-on-one duels. The legionaries fought in very tight formation, shielding themselves reliably with huge convex shields called scutums. Every 15 minutes, at the Centurions' whistle, the first, exhausted line would step back and fresh fighters would move forward. The savage Germanic tribes were simply driven mad by this incredible assembly line system of slaughter. Medical care for wounded legionaries was of an incredibly high standard for the grim times of antiquity. The famous Roman physician Galen, who had long studied the horrific wounds of gladiators and soldiers, introduced advanced surgical techniques. Each legion operated its own separate hospitals, called valetudinaria, where the wounded were treated with pure honey and sterile cloth. The overall mortality rate from severe injuries in the Roman army was significantly lower than in the armies of enlightened 19th century Europe. Soldiers knew for certain that the wealthy empire would take care of them if they suffered a serious injury while fighting for the emperor. This gave the soldiers immense psychological confidence and drastically reduced their instinctive fear of the enemy's blade. But not all healthy men could physically endure 20 long years as ordinary infantrymen. Enormous physical wear and tear on the joints and spine was inevitable, and the chances of dying remained high in every new campaign. The smartest legionnaires quickly realized that they needed to urgently find a legal way to ease their difficult lot. They began actively demonstrating useful civilian skills that would set them apart from the general mass of ordinary infantrymen. The military system was always ready to generously reward those who could offer more than just brute strength. And this is where ancient history becomes even more paradoxical and fascinating to study. Within the vast Roman army, there was a perfectly official way to permanently escape hard physical labor and the dangers of the front lines. To do so, one had to obtain a special status that completely exempted a talented soldier from the grueling routine. These educated men immediately became the legion's most valuable asset, shaping its internal economy, logistics, and bureaucracy. They instantly earned greater respect, slept in better quarters, and risked their lives far less often. Who were these incredibly lucky men who managed to legally outwit the harsh Roman military system? As soon as a rank-and-file soldier proved to his officers that he possessed special civilian talents, his status changed radically for the better. He was officially granted the honorary title of immunus, which literally translates to a person exempt from heavy duties. These fortunate individuals no longer had to dig deep trenches, stand cold night watch, or grind coarse grain in the evenings. They were highly specialized professionals, skilled carpenters, experienced blacksmiths, surgeons, engineers, and literate scribes. In the structure of a modern large corporation, they would be privileged programmers, systems accountants, and technical support engineers. The legion could not physically survive relying solely on aggressive men skilled at effectively wielding a sharp sword. To become an immune, one had to have a good profession even before joining the army or demonstrate incredible ingenuity once inside the camp. For example, the brilliant architect Apollodorus of Damascus, who accompanied Emperor Trajan, relied on an entire army of military engineers, immunes. These specialists could build a huge wooden bridge across the raging Danube in just a few days, which struck primal terror into the hearts of the local barbarians. Enemies suddenly realized that Rome was defeating them, not only with high-quality steel, but also with advanced mathematics. Military engineers calculated the firing angles of siege towers and heavy ballistas so precisely that to the uninitiated it seemed like pure magic. Your comfortable office job today requires a degree, but for the pragmatic Romans, constant practice and a wooden ruler were enough. Skilled blacksmiths and armor makers, known as fabbri, ensured the continuous and vital repair of all soldiers' equipment. In fierce combat, swords quickly became blunt, wooden shields split, and iron armor was pierced by heavy enemy spears. The fabbri always moved with the army and quickly set up their mobile forges right in the center of the tent camp. Imagine the incredible logistical effort involved. They had to carry tons of coal, heavy anvils, and leather hides across the wilds of Gaul. If a soldier's armor broke, he was doomed, which is why the grimy blacksmiths were respected no less than the medal-adorned Centurions. Their monotonous, grueling work saved thousands of lives every day, even though they themselves rarely drew their swords in battle. A special, classified place in the hierarchy was held by intelligence operatives, speculators and explorers. The elite of the invisible front, speculators, often worked covertly in civilian clothes, carefully gathering juicy rumors in the noisy taverns of enemy cities. In essence, This was genuine ancient intelligence work, reporting directly only to the highest command. The famous Julius Caesar, in his Gallic War, constantly relied on accurate data from his scouts to avoid deadly ambushes in the forests. Reliable information was always worth more than any gold back then, and the Romans spared no expense in paying for detailed maps of the terrain. Being recognized as an immunus was considered a tremendous stroke of luck, but basic military skills still had to be constantly maintained. In the event of a sudden nighttime attack by barbarians on a sleeping camp, scribes and blacksmiths would silently grab their shields and fall into formation with the rest of the troops. None of them were completely immune to the horrors of war, because a frenzied enemy couldn't care less about your useful specialty. But in times of peace, these trained men lived much longer and more comfortably than ordinary line infantrymen. Objectively speaking, they were the middle class of the vast legion, its intellectual and indispensable technical core. Their unique knowledge made any Roman army a completely self-sufficient, independent ecosystem. But for the most ambitious and ruthless soldiers, the peaceful status of an immunus was often far from enough to bring happiness. It was a very comfortable and secure position, but it lacked the ultimate prize, true power over other people. Advancement to a coveted command position required not only many years of good service, but also mandatory patronage from above. The legion was an extremely rigid, authoritarian hierarchy, where any initiative from below was often severely punished if it had not been approved in advance by superiors. To gain real power, an ambitious soldier had to demonstrate, day after day, a perfect balance of obedience and tactical initiative. The few who ultimately succeeded were solemnly awarded special insignia and granted the sacred right to give orders. Who then occupied this grey area between the ordinary, sweaty soldier and the legendary, fearsome centurion? The next important step in the social evolution of a Roman soldier was the prestigious rank of Principalus. These were experienced non-commissioned officers, the stern sergeants of antiquity, who exercised total control over literally every breath taken by ordinary legionaries. Principals were legally entitled to double or 1.5 times the standard pay, which instantly and permanently transformed their social status within the camp. Their main day-to-day task was to strictly enforce the daily routine and coordinate tactical details right on the battlefield. While renowned generals won global wars on clean maps, the principals won local battles knee-deep in blood and mud. They were the watchful eyes and keen ears of the high command in the unpredictable environment of the troops. The youngest of the principal officers was the Tesserarius, who was personally responsible for the secret passwords and night watch duties for the entire camp. The name of this highly responsible position derives from the Latin word tessera, a small wooden tablet on which the secret password was written. Every evening, the Tesserarius received this unique password from the tribune on duty and verbally relayed it to the commanders of the soldiers' decurions. If the important password were accidentally leaked to enemy spies, the Tesserarius could be swiftly and ruthlessly executed for treason. The security of the vast sleeping camp depended entirely and unconditionally on his personal vigilance and absolute incorruptibility. The most visually striking and prominent figure among all the officers was the signifer, the official standard-bearer of the cohort or centuria. He proudly carried the signum, a long sacred spear with metal discs that denoted the numbers and merits of the units. Over his helmet, the signifer always wore the pelt of a slain wolf or bear, which made him appear enormous, strange, and terrifying. In the chaos of battle, orders were conveyed exclusively through visual signals. A signum raised high signaled a fierce attack, while one lowered signaled an organized retreat. Enemies always deliberately aimed their arrows at the standard-bearer, because his sudden death instantly sowed chaos in the orderly ranks of the Romans. Only the strongest, tallest, and battle-tested veterans of the legion were appointed as signifer. In addition to his obvious tactical role, the signifer served as the centuria's chief financial officer. He meticulously safeguarded all the soldiers' savings in a secure underground vault located directly beneath the camp's altar. The soldiers placed their complete trust in him with their hard-earned money, because theft from beneath the sacred altar was considered a terrible religious sacrilege. The brilliant Julius Caesar once aptly noted that soldiers always fight much more fiercely when their personal bank is right behind them. The signifer honestly distributed pay, paid for the expensive funerals of the fallen, and kept strict mathematical records of absolutely all of the unit's expenses. It was an incredible, unprecedented concentration of financial and spiritual power in the hands of a single stern sergeant. Another strategically important figure was the imaginifer, who solemnly carried a three-dimensional image of the reigning emperor on a pole. This particular role emerged only in the late era of the empire, when the cult of personality surrounding Octavian Augustus became mandatory state law. The imagifer was a brilliant, walking reminder of exactly for whom these grimy soldiers were shedding their blood far from home. The golden or silver portrait of the emperor gleamed brightly in the sun and effectively boosted the legionnaires' flagging morale in critical moments. It was pure, undisguised political public relations, skillfully integrated directly into the structure of the combat tactical unit. A psychology of mass loyalty was fostered through constant, almost hypnotic visual contact with the deified symbol of supreme authority. The commanders formed a very exclusive, elite club within the vast legion, complete with its own unspoken and legitimate privileges. This coveted position was the absolute pinnacle of a military career for anyone who had risen from the ranks of the humblest, poorest soldiers. A man who attained this legendary rank gained unlimited power over the life and death of hundreds of subordinates. He became the living, terrifying embodiment of Roman discipline, ingenious tactics, and necessary military ruthlessness. For the sake of this single rank, soldiers risked their lives for years, performed daring feats, and wove complex political intrigues. How did this ruthless system of centurions work, and why were they the key to Rome's invincibility? The centurion is the most recognizable and iconic figure in the Roman army, its steel backbone and its muscles. There were exactly 60 of them in every Roman legion, and they commanded centuriae of 80 soldiers each with an iron fist. You would immediately recognize such a man in a crowd by his distinctive helmet with a transverse crest made of dyed horsehair, which helped soldiers spot their commander in the thick of battle. A centurion always wore metal greaves and chainmail, and his short sword was carried on his left side, unlike those of ordinary soldiers. This meant that he did not have to passively hold his position behind a massive shield. He fought as a fully independent individual warrior. His primary, fear-inspiring attribute was the vitis, a heavy staff made of grapevine, intended exclusively for the corporal punishment of offenders. The famous Roman historian Tacitus vividly described a cruel centurion named Lucilius, whom his terrified soldiers nicknamed "Bring Another One." He earned this mocking nickname because he would regularly break his staff on the backs of his legionnaires and immediately shout for a new one to be brought. The cruelty of such centurions was not senseless sadism. It was a deliberate psychological tool for the survival of the entire combat unit. In the unpredictable conditions of ancient battle, the panic of even a single weak individual could shatter the formation and instantly destroy everyone around him. The sharp pain from a blow with the rod brought a soldier who had fallen into a daze back to reality much faster than any persuasion or pleas. A centurion had to be more fearsome to his own soldiers than a whole crowd of screaming barbarians charging at them. The internal hierarchy among the 60 centurions themselves was no less complex and convoluted than that of the modern general staff of a large army. There were several dozen strict ranks, and career advancement always proceeded from the weak 10th cohort to the elite 1st. The youngest centurion in the legion commanded the rear line on the left flank, where it was relatively safe and boring. With each new promotion, he was transferred closer and closer to the right flank and the front line, into the very thick of the bloodiest battle. This is a remarkable paradox of the Roman system. The higher your rank and experience, the greater the chance of being killed in the very first engagement. But along with the mortal risk came greater pay, so there was never a shortage of those eager for a promotion. A good centurion's official salary was 15 times greater than the meager pay of an ordinary foot soldier. He always received the best cuts of roasted meat, slept in a huge private tent, and legally owned personal slaves for his domestic needs. Many centurions regularly accepted bribes from wealthy soldiers in exchange for exemption from hard labor, and the high command deliberately turned a blind eye to this. It was a kind of unspoken corrupt bonus added to their official salary, which motivated commanders to serve Rome faithfully for decades on end. Casualties among centurions were always truly catastrophic in absolutely every major battle of that era. In the decisive Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar lost about 30 experienced centurions in a single day, exactly half of the legion's entire command staff. They had no moral right to retreat first and always stood in the front rank alongside their attacking men. An ordinary legionary might try to hide behind a comrade's broad shield, but a centurion was obliged to demonstrate complete contempt for death at every moment. If a commander showed the slightest fear, his centuria would instantly lose its fighting spirit, break ranks, and flee. Their exemplary courage was just as much a consumable tactical resource as wooden spears or heavy stones for catapults. One of the greatest historical examples of such professional courage is a real centurion named Spurius Ligustinus. He served faithfully in the 2nd century BC and once delivered a public speech before the entire Roman Senate. Ligustin calmly recounted that he had served for 22 years, received 34 awards for bravery, and personally saved the lives of Roman citizens on 6 occasions. But even among these 60 elite legionary centurions, there was an unattainable, almost divine elite. These were the few men who commanded the legendary first cohort, the most important and elite unit of the entire army. They stood arrogantly at the very top of the soldiers' pecking order, answerable only to the highest-ranking capital aristocrats and generals. Their authoritative influence was so great that a single weighty word from them could easily alter the course of international political negotiations, and the most prominent of these elite commanders bore a unique title that inspired a sacred awe throughout the vast empire. Achieving this incredible rank was more difficult than it is for a modern manager to become the CEO of the world's largest multinational corporation. The man in this exceptional position had to possess not only the strength of a bear, but also a brilliant political instinct for survival. He became the most crucial link between the mud of the soldiers' trenches and the dazzling gold of the imperial palaces in the capital. This rank was the ultimate, most coveted pinnacle of achievement for absolutely any commoner in ancient Rome. Who was this enigmatic man, and why did haughty generals always heed his advice before every battle? The highest military rank a common Roman soldier could attain was called Primipilus, which translates as Centurion of the First Spear. He was the absolute commander of the first centuria of the first cohort of a massive legion, its heart and soul. Unlike the other regular units, the first cohort consisted of 800 men, exclusively the most experienced and elite veterans. The Primipilus was an unquestioned, almost sacred authority for all 5,000 soldiers of this gigantic military machine. His official salary was 60 times that of an ordinary legionary, making him a true millionaire by the harsh standards of antiquity. He was the boss among all bosses, a living legend in the flesh, a miracle who had survived to a ripe old age on the very front lines. The Primipilus' role on the Strategic Military Council was absolutely critical to the success of any large-scale imperial campaign. Rome's generals were all too often young, ambitious politicians who knew absolutely nothing about the real tactics of dirty close-quarters combat. The Primipilus, on the other hand, had fought his entire adult life and could boldly tell a noble aristocrat to his face that his plan would not work. The position of Primipilus was held for just a single year, after which the distinguished soldier could retire for good with incredible honor. He automatically received the lifelong status of a equestrian, a member of Rome's lower aristocracy, permanently changing his social class. This was the only truly functioning social ladder in ancient Rome, allowing a filthy, illiterate peasant to become a respected nobleman. For the sake of this slim chance, it was worth enduring decades of endless marches, deadly diseases, severe injuries, and the risk of being brutally crucified while in barbarian captivity. After completing his service, a former Primipilus could become a very successful businessman or the chief military advisor to the governor of any province. The empire always generously rewarded with gold and land those few who gave it all their blood without reserve. But for the most outstanding and ambitious Primipili, there was one more final step upward, the rank of camp prefect or praetor castrum. This was officially the third highest position in the legion's complex hierarchy, after the commander-in-chief, legate, and the senior tribune. The camp prefect was solely responsible for all the complex logistics, siege engines, the uninterrupted supply of food, and medical care. In the absence of prominent political commanders, it was the prefect who assumed absolute command of the entire vast legion. He did not buy his high office with bribes or connections. He earned it through 40 years of survival in the bloodiest meat grinders. He knew firsthand how to repair a broken ballista and exactly how many sacks of grain a starving army needed for a single rainy week. In the 14th year AD, a terrible soldiers' mutiny suddenly broke out in the German legions due to unbearably poor conditions of service. The historian Tacitus describes in detail in his works how the frenzied soldiers mercilessly killed their commanders and junior officers, but they miraculously spared the old camp prefect, Rufus, because he was one of them, a veteran soldier who had risen from the mud. The soldiers sincerely respected the prefect, realizing that his ugly scars were genuine, unlike the smooth, well-groomed skin of the capital's aristocratic tribunes. The camp prefect was the chief guarantor of the army's stability, living proof that the ruthless system could, at times, still be fair to its sons. His authoritative word alone could easily quell a bloody riot that the frightened capital politicians were unable to control. The camp prefect's direct responsibilities also always included detailed route planning and selecting a safe place to spend the night. But even the prefect and the primipil, no matter how great and respected they might be, were never supreme commanders-in-chief. Directly above them stood the highest caste of untouchable aristocrats, who joined the army solely to score quick political points. These haughty individuals spoke flawless literary Latin, read the complex works of Greek philosophers, and wore unimaginably expensive cloaks. There was always a hidden tension between the old, scarred veterans and these young politicians, masked by military regulations. How did this strange relationship develop between those who shed their blood and those who shamelessly claimed all the glory for themselves? To fully understand the twisted logic of the entire system, we need to take a close look at the very top of this pyramid of power. There, fateful decisions were made, not for the sake of the soldiers' survival, but solely for the sake of prestigious seats in the Roman Senate. The high command of the vast legion operated according to entirely different, cynical rules, where family connections mattered far more than combat experience. These political offices were forever out of reach for mere mortal peasants, no matter how great of heroes they might be. Who then so readily sent such brave soldiers as our maimed Scaever to certain death at Dyrrhachium? The supreme command of any Roman legion was always in the clean hands of men for whom the filthy business of war was merely a brief stepping stone in a political career. At the very top stood the legion's legate, a distinguished senator from Rome, personally appointed by the emperor or the ruling consul. He was the undisputed commander-in-chief, a great general whose luxurious tent stood in the most secure center of the fortified camp. Legates were extremely rarely professional soldiers. More often than not, they were shrewd politicians, successful lawyers, or civil administrators. They needed a military triumph at any cost to win elections for high public office upon their return to the capital. To such a legate, ordinary soldiers were merely expendable, blood-stained tools for achieving personal political ambitions. However, it cannot be categorically stated that all legates were completely incompetent amateurs when it came to the military arts of antiquity. In Rome, every aristocrat was required to learn horseback riding, the use of a heavy sword, and the basics of military tactics from early childhood. The relationship between the haughty tribunes and the stern centurions resembled the classic conflict between a young, foolish boss and an experienced old master at a factory. The tribunes confidently issued orders, relying on lofty Greek theories, while the Centurions translated those orders into the plain language of brutal reality. A wise tribune always listened carefully to his veterans, fully understanding that his fragile life depended directly on their sharp swords. A foolish tribune arrogantly tried to command with an iron fist and very often died, quite by accident, from a stray enemy arrow in the very first battle. The legion knew how to effectively weed out outright idiots from its command, using methods that were quite brutal but absolutely reliable. Only those capital aristocrats who could quickly adapt to the harsh laws of blood, mud, and steel survived. The legate's primary role on the battlefield was the skillful management of reserves and the overall strategic coordination of forces. He watched the battle closely from high ground, surrounded by bodyguards, and sent orders via swift-mounted messengers. The legate had to intuitively sense the very moment when the enemy line would falter and throw fresh reserve cohorts into the fray just in time. The mistakes of overconfident legates cost Rome dearly, forever and irrevocably altering the course of world history. In the 9th year AD, the foolish legate Publius Quintilius Varus arrogantly ignored the advice of his scouts and led 3 legions deep into the Teutoburg forest. The savage Germanic tribes methodically wiped out the Romans to the last man, because the commander turned out to be a politician who was both too gullible and incompetent. The aging Emperor Augustus then spent years banging his head against the walls of his palace, crying out in despair, "Varus, give me back my legions." This bloody catastrophe irrefutably proved that no amount of iron discipline from the Centurions could save an army from the folly of its commander-in-chief. The elite were entitled to make monstrous mistakes, but it was always the ordinary, nameless infantrymen who paid for them with their lives. But when a talented legate was at the helm, the Roman army became the most destructive and invincible force on the planet. Julius Caesar himself knew many of his centurions by name, and often addressed the soldiers as "my faithful comrades in arms." He could personally dismount, take up a heavy shield, and stand in the front rank to halt retreating soldiers by his very presence alone. In such rare moments, the social divide between a patrician and a common tiro was completely erased, transforming the legion into an invincible brotherhood. Soldiers were ready to follow such generals into any adventure, even if it meant an armed campaign against sacred Rome itself. The ideal legate always harmoniously combined the cold calculation of a cynical politician with the fierce charisma of a field commander. This entire, highly complex hierarchy of ranks, from the frightened recruit to the haughty legate, functioned like a single, perfectly oiled clockwork mechanism. Every cog knew exactly its place, its strict rights, its daily duties, and its lawful share of the spoils. This incredible system allowed Rome to lose individual battles, yet to win ever larger wars, relentlessly and ruthlessly. But how did this dry theory of military hierarchy work in practice when the moment of absolute and insurmountable crisis arrived? We left Marcus Cassius Sceva at Dyrrhachium alongside their commander. The Roman system revealed its true nature. It always demanded the impossible, but honestly rewarded it with real power and gold. It was a brutal, bloody, yet utterly transparent social contract between a growing empire and an ambitious man. But the story of Scaevour is not merely a beautiful ancient legend about an invincible ancient superhero with a sword. It is direct proof that the Roman military machine was entirely based on a deep understanding of human psychology and fears. They knew for certain that the primal fear of death could be overcome by only two things: the fear of punishment and an insatiable thirst for recognition. The legion's hierarchy was so terrifyingly effective that many barbarian tribes tried to copy it for centuries, but they never succeeded, because while it is easy to copy ranks, it is utterly impossible to copy a way of thinking. To produce a single true centurion required a developed infrastructure, a strong economy, taxes, and centuries of relentless national discipline. The barbarians could easily make the same wooden shield or steal the same helmet after a successful battle in the forest, but they were physically incapable of forcing their free men to dig a deep trench after a 30-kilometer march in freezing rain. This was the very secret of Rome's invincibility, securely hidden in the dull, blood-stained army regulations. After all, the Roman army was merely a faithful reflection of Roman society itself, with all its vices and grandeur. The widespread corruption of the leaders, the intrigues of the tribunes, the cruelty of the centurions, and the astonishing endurance of the rank-and-file soldiers, all intertwined to form a single living organism. They stubbornly built their civilization with their calloused hands and generously poured the blood of others and their own into its stone foundation. Today, we calmly gaze upon the ruins of the Colosseum or the straight lines of European roads and sincerely admire the culture of antiquity. But we constantly forget that absolutely all of this architectural splendor was paid for in full by men in pierced iron armor. Marcus Cassius Scaevour miraculously survived that bloody massacre at Dyrrhachium, though he was left disabled for life. His remarkable career became a perfect historical example of how the system generously rewards those who play by its rules to the very end. He reached the pinnacle of his career by becoming a respected elite Primipilus, known personally to the great dictator Julius Caesar himself. His name is forever inscribed in history in letters of gold, not because of his noble birth, but because of his monstrous soldierly stubbornness. He irrefutably proved that in the Roman army, the blood of a commoner could be valued higher than that of a senator if it was shed in the right place. When we reflect on the structure of the ancient legion, we all too often see in it only the senseless cruelty and violence of a dark past. But take a closer look at your everyday life, at the rigid structure of modern companies and government agencies. You are bound to see the same levels of control, the same stifling bureaucracy, and the same methods of motivating employees. Only the outward trappings have changed, while the basic psychology of managing large masses of people has remained completely unchanged since the time of Augustus. Great Rome did not vanish without a trace. It simply traded its heavy leather armor for austere modern business suits. On this long journey from an ordinary, frightened peasant to a commander-in-chief, we have clearly seen the true, bloody price of power. Every rank in the Roman legion was not merely a formal position, but a way of thinking and a means of physical survival. I hope that from now on, the identical red tunics and historical paintings will no longer seem to you like a faceless, homogeneous mass of soldiers. Behind every wooden shield stood a living person with a specific role, a salary, ambitions, and an animalistic fear of their commander. Great history is made not only by haughty generals in cloaks, but also by those who silently march forward at their command.